Welcome to Theory of Pets. I'm a passionate pet owner with a drive to help others like me uncover the truth about the pet industry and what goes on behind the scenes.
All right, everybody, thank you for joining me today. My name is Connor Knight. I'm the president of Top Dog Tips. Today, I have yet again Dr. Lyndsey Kingsley on today. We're actually going to be going into detail about proper pet care. Let's say you get a new dog, whether it's a new puppy or an adult dog that you've rescued or a senior dog or something like that, and the proper care and the checklist you need to go through when bringing them home into new environments, other dogs, and as well as like behavioral training and training overall, from a veterinary perspective. So I'm excited for this one because I have yet to hear on the behavior side as far as what we should be doing as pet owners. So thanks for joining me today, Dr. Kingsley.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Cool. So let's start off with the first question. So, there's some basic guidelines that you can find on Google for pet owners and new pet owners on how much physical and mental activity dogs need. And you have trainers that say they need mental and physical stimulation in order to be happy. Now, from a vet's perspective, how many minutes per day should dogs be physically active? And how many minutes should they be active mentally to really get that optimized, very happy dog and also calm, making sure that there's no behavior problems?
Yeah, that's a question that we get a lot. And the knee-jerk reaction is I have this 2-year-old perma puppy lab that's just bouncing off the walls. And you just think, okay, I'm going to go play fetch with him for 2 hours, or I'm going to go take him on, this super long hike. And that's going to give me this calm, well-adjusted dog, which is true to some effect. But it's so funny. My dog, he's pretty hyper. And he's the Energizer Bunny. He can go and go and go. And that's how, when he was a little guy, we'd go on these long walks and he'd come and pass out for 20 minutes at home, or he'd pass out in the car on the way back on the drive back to the house. And then as soon as we got back, it was like, boop, hit the reset button. That never happened. I could go do that hike again, no problem. But if I would take him to training classes, or if I dropped him off for a day with a friend of mine who's a behaviorist, he would come back and just be wiped. I'm like, what did you do to my dog? Like, how long did you work him?
Mm-hmm.
She said, we had, 5 to 10 minute sessions, throughout the day, no big deal. And I was like, he is the most exhausted I've ever seen him. So, the mental stimulation and just getting these guys' brains going, I think is even more valuable than the physical aspect of it. And the mental aspect, that can be training, that can be scent work, that can be, instead of just going out on a walk and just charging through, let your dog stop and kind of read the P-mail, so to speak. And that's all very mentally stimulating. So I wouldn't say that there's any hard and fast, this is how many minutes we need, or even rule of thumb. The physical needs for an English bulldog are going to be very different than the physical needs of a duck-toling retriever. But from a mental aspect, there's really never too much unless you're kind of working them past the point of their comfort zone.
That's interesting because you hear about it from dog trainers. So I didn't know the jury was out on both sides, veterinarians and dog trainers, where mental stimulation is very important. Because you have these dog trainers, and there are some that went to school, but a lot of them are just running a business, and they just have a lot of experience with dogs. And you just kind of you kind of go off what they say just because that's what they've seen. But it sounds like, there's science behind, the actual mental stimulation.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. And, not all dog trainers are created equal. I know we're going to get into that a little bit later in the conversation, but every dog's different. And, if you have a dog that has a little bit more anxiety or is a little bit more fearful, making sure that mental stimulation is coming from a good place and not reinforcing any of their anxieties or fears.
Hmm.
And the method of training, if you are working with a trainer or behaviorist, can really fall into that and make a big impact in it.
So I guess let's give some actionable tools here, for those who don't like do a lot of research and they just have a new dog and they just kind of decide to do it on a whim or something like that, and they're not really prepared. I've done that. That's how I got my dog. I was just like, I'm gonna get one because I want one. Um, so let's talk a lot about some mental stimulation tools that you feel are, what's the phrase? Tried and true? Is that the right phrase?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about a couple of those that we can give to the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So it depends on the age of the dog.
Hmm.
So if you have a puppy that's between 3 and 12 weeks old, the mental stimulation is just it knows no bounds. I mean, everything that puppy is coming into contact with is new. They're interpreting it. They're forming these impactful relationships with things that down the road could either be bad or they could be good. And we want to build this very happy, good foundation. It's almost like building a house. You want a really solid, firm foundation versus one that's kind of built on sticks. So,
Hmm.
safely exposing it, just even going for walks around the block or going on car rides and going and meeting new people, going and meeting dogs that their vaccine status of, getting around different smells and farmers markets. And,
Hmm.
um, you know, I wouldn't necessarily take him into PetSmart or Petco, but, little things like that, just absolutely everything could be considered mental stimulation in a
Hmm.
younger animal. As you get
Okay.
a little bit older, different enrichment tools. So, say your dog, you'll be leaving for a while,
Hmm.
and we still want to mentally stimulate our pet, even if we're not there, and that can actually help with things like separation anxiety as well. So, Kong toys and different puzzle toys are really, really great. One of my personal favorite is loading a Kong toy up, even with either like a pate style wet dog food with some different
Hmm.
things mixed in, or mixing in like low sodium chicken broth and different kind of bits of kibble or that sort of thing, and freeze them, make a popsicle, and that'll just keep them going for 30, 40 minutes even after you're gone.
Hmm.
um Different puzzle bowls and that sort of thing. Yeah, really, instead of just eating out of a bowl, having to really have your dog think through how they're gonna navigate this little meal. um I mentioned before scent training, so just taking them out, letting them just follow their nose in a nice, safe environment. Um, Honestly, a big thing, and it's a point of contention both with some veterinarians as well as different behaviorists, but dog parks are not
Hmm.
always the best source of um, mental exhaustion. If we're not really keen on what the social dynamic is with all of the other dogs in the dog park, and some dogs are more comfortable with it than others. So for a dog that's maybe a little bit more timid, that could actually be a really stressful. It's going to wear them out. I mean, it is considered mentally stimulating,
Hmm.
but it could certainly reinforce some different fears and anxieties that could really add up and be detrimental in the long term.
Yeah, especially if they're interacting with a dog that's not really friendly and shouldn't be at the dog park, or at least
Mhm.
should be socialized properly before going to a dog park.
Right.
So I do have another question about senior dogs. How do you? What are your thoughts about this? Do you feel that mental stimulation is important as far as how long an older dog lives? Do you feel like mental stimulation can lengthen their life? I could. There's a study about or thought process about always having goals as a human, because once you don't have a purpose, unfortunately, when like an older person goes to like a nursing home, that's not where you see them die. Obviously, this is morbid, but you see them decline,
Right.
and they have no goals, no purpose anymore. So do you feel like that's the same in dogs when they are around the senior age?
I mean, that's definitely a hard extrapolation from the human side, but from the medical side, we certainly see cognitive dysfunction in older dogs, which is essentially like dementia, Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
We treat it with the similar medications that we use in people as well. So um, there haven't been any hard and fast studies done on it, but I would imagine the more mentally stimulated, just like a person, the brain is the muscle, the better they are going to be long term. And usually the mental stimulation goes hand in hand with the physical exertion. So
Hmm.
usually that gets them up and moving, and it's almost like you said, it's their goal.
Hmm.
So those two things combined, I think anyone would have a hard time arguing that it wouldn't. It certainly contributes to their quality of life,
Yeah.
which with our pets, it's the most important thing.
Yeah, it's the reason I bring it up is because I've brought up my girlfriend's dog Chase a couple times on the podcast, and I noticed that he has this consistent cough, and the vets like say that he has dementia, but he gets. Anyways, what I was gonna say is when he gets exercise, he has this thing called an inflammatory airway disease, and
Hmm.
he has a constant cough when he's resting, but it goes away when he exercises. One, and then two, so two, on the mental stimulation side, he used to stay at her parents' house, and they kind of, they worked full-time jobs, so they weren't home.
Hmm.
So he, didn't really get out much to explore. They had him like in like one of those little baby gates when they weren't home. But I noticed when she moved him over here that his quality of life seemed to go up because it seemed like he was more mentally stimulated. This dog is either going on 17 or 18. So it just seems like his quality of life, when a dog's older, you start to do the quality of life checklists. If they start to slow down, sleep more, have these problems, and it seemed like the quality of life checklist actually, like if I had it, in hand, it improved just watching him go from her parents' house to our house now.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm sure that's all things aside. I mean, 17, 18-year-old, I'm just envisioning, this rickety little dachshund just, plodding around the house. But,
Mm-hmm.
and the phrase I always get is the spark in their eye, is
Mm-hmm.
like an owner, that's how they know, like cognitively, how checked in are they? And it's just that little spark.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really trying to encourage that and give them a little bit more engagement with their environment. I think it's important for little old timers.
Yeah, he's definitely alert for his age. All right, so let's move into hygiene, because this one's kind of funny since, with the growth of the pet industry and people owning dogs has exploded since COVID, and it's just been growing for the past 20 years. So, people, what's the word? They anthropomorphize their dog, and now there's this whole. So let me first talk about humans. There's this movement in humans where they don't. They believe that shampoo actually strips the oils from their hair and dries out their scalp. So over
Mhm.
shampooing, and so there's these people that don't shampoo their hair for like weeks on end. Kind of gross. But
Yeah,
hey,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. To each
um,
their own.
but there, I think there's also people out there that kind of have the same thought process. But I guess my question is about hygiene: is how often should people shampoo or bathe their dog because, just to give an example, my dad, it's not like he's more, it's more out of like laziness rather than like, I believe it strips the oils from my dog's skin, you know. So yeah, he maybe gives the dog a bath once a year, but the dog doesn't smell like wet dog or anything like that. She smells fine, doesn't like have like a stink to her at all. What are your thoughts on that? How often would you say?
So it depends on the dog. So a dog that has no skin issues, they have no allergies, there's no yeast overgrowth, there's no
Hmm.
bacterial infections. I mean, they're going to smell like a dog, but that's not necessarily bad.
Hmm.
Dogs don't sweat like we do. So, if they have kind of their protective layer of fur. Um, and they can cruise around, if they're not constantly in the water, if they're not
Hmm.
rolling around in mud,
Yeah.
they can manage, and you have the more sporty dogs that are meant to be in the water. They
Hmm.
always have kind of a little bit of a natural odor to them. But I mean, admittedly, my dog, unless he goes and finds just something absolutely disgusting to roll in or a mud puddle, which for whatever reason he loves, I probably only bathe him every 3 to 4 months, and that's more to get the hair off of him than
Hmm.
anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's certainly not something that needs to happen all the time. But if we
Hmm.
have a dog that does have skin allergies and they're really itchy and they have yeast overgrowth and you can smell them from the other side of the room,
Yeah.
then we're recommending those dogs be bathed
Hmm.
with medicated shampoo, once, twice a day.
Wow. That's pretty
Yeah,
often. Do
yeah.
you so that's interesting. Yeah, and I mean that totally makes sense because I could see, I mean that's totally disgusting if like a dog rolls around in mud and then just comes into your house. So as long as the dog isn't getting into something nasty, trash, dirt, sand, and you don't want it in your house, then at least I will opt to bathe my dog, or at least like rinse her off.
Hmm.
Maybe not. I don't like go through the whole shampoo conditioner. I was doing that a while in the beginning. Not so much now because she's more of like just a house dog. I take her on walks, and then every now and then my dad takes her out um, a couple times a week to. We have a property. It's like a little piece of land. There's no like mud puddles or anything, but they just kind of run around on like normal grass.
Hmm.
So I wanted to also, I guess, extrapolate that whole thing with the shampoo, because I didn't really ask you directly about it. Do you feel that over shampooing the dog will strip the oils, or do you feel like there's
Oh,
some shampoos that will do that?
absolutely. So one of the big things is using a human product on a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Their skin pH is very different than ours. So if you want to bathe your dog, if the natural scent of dog is just offensive to you, then using a very specific, this is made for dogs, not this is
Mm-hmm.
made for cats, not this is made for people, this is made for dogs.
Got it.
And and I wouldn't go crazy. Once a week would seem very excessive. I feel like in a dog, again, that has completely healthy skin, otherwise, once a month would be my recommendation if I had a
Mm-hmm.
client come and ask me that question with a dog specific shampoo.
Okay. And then do you feel like they just need to be shampooed, or do you feel like conditioner will help moisturize? Well, conditioner was always just like softening the hair. I don't really know if, like, at least in humans, I don't really know if you would add oil back to the scalp, you
I mean,
know?
it depends. If you have, like a border collie or an Aussie, a little bit longer haired coat
Yeah.
and you want to have a really soft, luxurious dog, then great.
Well, it
Um,
probably will help with the mats. Those longer
oh,
hair
for
dogs, the
sure.
conditioner's probably better for longer hair.
Yeah, and brushing is not to be, brushed aside. Brushing is as important as bathing too, to get some of the undercoat and make sure, because we're taking a domesticated dog,
Hmm.
and a Great Pyrenees probably wasn't meant to live in,
Yeah.
Austin, Texas, but we're doing it anyways. So
And living
there
with
is
it in your house.
exactly in an apartment. So we do need, as pet owners, need to be responsible and do that little extra legwork to help these guys in their unnatural environment.
Yeah, I didn't really even touch on the brushing hygiene. Now that I think about it, isn't just bathing. It's grooming too.
Hmm.
So let's talk about the grooming aspect, the brushing. I know for short-haired dogs, that's not really a problem unless they're shedding a lot. Maybe you can kind of get most of that out. But what would you recommend for people who had just got a long-haired dog, don't really know how often, they should brush it to get, the excess coat off? What would you
Hmm.
recommend?
Well, the you really can't overdo it, especially if your dog enjoys it. Then it's just one more thing that can strengthen the human animal bond.
Mm.
And my corgi, she defies physical law. I feel like I could brush her every minute of every day, and I'd still get a pile of hair the size of her after every single session. So,
Hmm.
if they enjoy it and you don't mind it, and there's really not too much you can do.
Hmm.
So, different types of brushes, like a slicker brush or a furminator. Furminators can be a little bit abrasive on the skin. So,
Hmm.
if you feel like your dog is like, oh, this kind of hurts so good, or maybe not at all, then I would dial it back.
Got it. Okay. And then while we're on hygiene, I mean, let's just round it off with nail trimming. Like, there's not, I don't really, there's your phrase, there's no hard, fast way to really decide when to trim your dog's nails, but I guess, except looking at them, when you're just kind of checking them out, what signs would you look for when you're like, ooh, that dog needs to have their nails trimmed? And what would you recommend? Because there's clippers, there's nail grinders now, and then
Mhm.
there's if you really want to just, file your dog's nail down with a regular file.
Yeah. So obviously, if you have a little tap dancer, if you can hear them coming from across the house and you can hear their nails are just clattering on a floor,
Hmm.
and if you physically look at them and they're being displaced one way or the other, then they probably really need to have their nails trimmed.
Yeah, you're a little
Um,
late on that one then. If they're,
yeah, you missed the boat. But
yeah.
um but honestly, as a veterinarian, nail trims are my least favorite thing to do. There are so many dogs that the nail bed of a dog has a lot of very sensitive nerves.
Hmm.
And most dogs in their lifetime have been clipped, so they've actually been clipped a little bit too short to the point where it gets down to that
Hmm.
very sensitive area in the
Yeah.
toe.
Oh, and good
And
luck trimming them after that.
oh, yeah, it's we have dogs that are just you can draw blood, you can vaccinate them, you can restrain them in any way, and they're just like, oh, I don't care. It's still it's attention, and then you pull out the clippers and like, oh, not only no, but heck no. And then
Yeah.
it's a huge rodeo, and a lot of that does come into sensitization when they were young, but
Hmm.
it's a relatively unsavory process. So we do see a lot of dogs that we missed the boat on when we should have clipped their nails. But
Hmm.
I personally like in making sure they're fresh and sharp. Replace your trimmers on a regular basis. Don't have rusty, nasty trimmers that are really dull. But just a regular, not the guillotine type, but just a regular clipper. If your dog will tolerate the nail grinders, like the Petty Paw, or I know
Hmm.
Dremel makes one that's specifically for pets. Um, Working up and desensitizing your dog to tools like that, the noise and the vibration, not necessarily jumping in and say, I'm going to, grind all of my dog's nails. Maybe you get to that point in a month or 2 months. But those are super helpful. It's a lot harder to quick your dog. It's a little bit easier from a maintenance standpoint. They
Yeah.
don't get sharp edges. So
Yeah.
those two products, either used individually or combined, are my two favorite tools.
Yeah, I stick with the Dremel because I tried the clipping and I think it was pretty jarring for my dog.
Hmm.
Um, she just didn't. I have cut her quick before once, So that was pretty much it right after that. So, and, but, yeah, no, I mean, because although you have to like hold her down, it's just not fun. Not fun for me. Stressful for me because I don't want to hurt
Right.
her, and stressful for her because she thinks she's in trouble. She thinks she's done something bad. She doesn't love the Dremel, but she will
Hmm.
stand there and let me like go through each one. So
Right.
it's taken some time though. I did have to like play, like turn it on, have it near her, let her
Hmm.
sniff it. You know, so
Yeah.
I personally, and doesn't when you use the clippers, do you risk? Because I heard that you can also fracture the nail. Is that possible?
If it is, especially if there's little splits, and if you're getting really short, or if you're working, with an older dog, if there's some underlying condition where they have like pemphigus or some um yeah, or like a yeast nail bed infection where the nail is just not normal, it's really brittle,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, using some of the trimmers and going, for the whole nail all in one. Usually those you kind of have to take little bits all the way up and you have to do it relatively delicately, but those
Got
are less often than not.
okay. Now let's move on into the nutrition side of care. Um, we've talked about nutrition before, and if people want to go listen to that one, it's podcast number 128. It's on YouTube. Or it's on the Apple Podcast app, or if you're on Spotify, it should be up there as well. But I just want to touch on it, and then we'll move into some other stuff. So, yeah, what kind of dog food would you recommend out of the three: commercial, homemade, or raw? Um, and if people could afford homemade or raw versus commercial, out of the three, which would you choose and why?
I would, and this is a very unlikely scenario, but if I had a board certified veterinary nutritionist on standby, writing essentially like a blue apron for dogs with written by a nutritionist,
Mm-hmm.
uh, homemade isn't wrong, but being on the sideline, we see a lot more homemade diets done wrong than done right. And they're usually not regulated at all, even though they look delicious and again, anthropomorphizing what a dog needs and what we need and what we see as satiating doesn't necessarily mean it's complete. So, um, raw diets can the commercially regulated raw diets aren't aren't too bad. We know they're nutritious. We know they're complete. We know they are fortified. They're a much safer alternative than a homemade raw diet that's just uncooked raw ingredients. And then if your lifestyle does not accommodate the legwork of all of those three, there's still nothing wrong with commercial kibble. It's still
Mm-hmm.
nutritional, it's still balanced, it's stable. The numbers of recalls are extremely low, and it doesn't pose a public health risk as far as possibly subjecting, other pets or members of the household to things like E. coli and salmonella, which we often see with raw products.
Okay.
Um, so just, they all have their own little caveats there.
Got it. All right. So now let's move into training. This is a big topic because, like I said before, um, it's the area where you have a lot of experienced dog trainers. They're not scientists. Not a lot of them went to school. It's just a business, but they have 10, 20, 30 years in dog training, dog behavioral training, just from having clients. So they are considered experts. And I want to know what your perspective is, and this is just general terms. So we're just talking very basic checklist here. Now, from a veterinary perspective, what's the best protocol you would recommend to follow for a training program for just a new dog of any age?
Yeah, so I think the first step would be to identify, and I think this is a very commonly missed step in behavior modification of an animal, is identifying, do we have a training problem or do we have a medical or emotional problem? Because
Hmm.
they're handled very different. And that is a more appropriate designation with a veterinarian or a veterinary behaviorist versus a trainer. I know a lot
Hmm.
of incredibly talented trainers that are very good at what they do. But if there's some medical or emotional underlying issue with that pet, they're not going to get as much from that regimen and experience, and could potentially make things worse. So I've
Hmm.
had clients that have spent just thousands upon thousands on board and train, proven time and time again, works for hundreds of other dogs, but they send their dog away and they come back and their separation anxiety is worse, or their fear aggression is worse, or they're more sensitive to thunderstorm anxiety or that sort of thing. And what that really comes down to is we sent them for a training, something to fix a training problem, when really it was an emotional problem that wasn't necessarily addressed.
Wow, that's that's interesting. I could definitely see that. I have never personally known anyone to have that issue, but so explain to me where you draw the line where they need to be seen by a dog trainer, and then they need to be seen by an animal behaviorist or a veterinary behaviorist.
So usually if you have a true behavior issue, it's pretty evident. And as a house call veterinarian, I mean, we certainly saw plenty of dogs with behavioral issues in a brick and mortar, but as a house call veterinarian, you see all the animals that have these serious behavior issues that exclude them from being able to be out in public,
Mm-hmm.
or they're just absolutely terrified of the car, or they're terrified of other people, or they're terrified of other dogs, or they're very dog aggressive, or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. So I've had a lot more exposure with this as a house call vet as opposed to a vet that works in just a regular brick and mortar clinic. And what it comes down to is once those behaviors start affecting the quality of life for both the owner and for the pet, that is, I mean, kind of like the dog with the sideways nails. That's kind of past the point where we really needed to intervene. If we have a happy, well-adjusted puppy that's just ears are forward, tails wagging, it's just stoked about life, you know, that guy needs to go to training school and he
Mm-hmm.
can just skip right past, as long as he's vaccinated and otherwise healthy. That's a great scenario for, okay, go and see a dog trainer. If we have a dog that's, growling and we have aggression issues, they're biting, if there's inappropriate urination and defecation when they had previously been perfectly house trained, if we're
Mm.
having, destructive behaviors, or um, you know, they're circling or anything like that, those are things that more often than not need to have a medical intervention, um, and then work in tandem with a behavior or a trainer that can help kind of rewire, how that dog perceives things. And, just kind of expanding on that, um, inappropriate behavior, behavioral issues, it's actually the the number one, this sounds really dramatic, but it's the number one killer in dogs from age 0 to 3. The people will get these puppies, and during the pandemic it's been a really, really big issue. Typically if you get a puppy, you're like, okay, what can I expose them to? And we had just a massive people saying, I'm going to get a puppy and I'm not going to expose it to anything. I'm going to
Me.
quarantine with this puppy. And some people got lucky, and then others, it turned into a big problem. And almost kind of like the baby boomer wave, we now have the pandemic puppy wave. Um, and it's been a struggle with some to kind of reset the clock and work backwards on these behaviors. A puppy from 3 weeks to 12 weeks, I mean, that's kind of the sponge period
Hmm.
where they're just taking everything in, and you can really mold their behavior. Once we get past that 12-week mark, they become less elastic. In the
Hmm.
wild, an animal is conditioned to fear things. That's what helps them survive,
Right.
is developing these aversions to other things. So, um, that's exactly what happens with our domestic species too. If they don't have positive associations with these things when they're really little. Um, so I know I just went off on a huge tangent on that one, but it is something, because we see so much of it as house call vets, that we're really passionate about. And so I encourage, if you feel like there's your dog might have a behavior issue and it's affecting their quality of life or your quality of life, um, the sooner you intervene, the better chance you have of trying to reverse these
Hmm.
different behaviors.
Got it. When you said something about along the lines of a new puppy, the elasticity goes away after a certain point. Um, I wanted to ask because do you feel like senior dogs need to be trained? Because you know, the way I trained. Oh, she's not there. The way I thought I was going to point back to my dog.
She's usually always right
Yeah,
there.
I know. She
Yeah.
usually, if you're listening, my dog. I'm standing at my desk. My dog usually stands or lays down behind me on the carpet. But
She
I.
heard me taking on pandemic puppies.
Yeah, exactly. The way I trained my puppy is not the same way I can train a senior dog like my girlfriend's dog Chase. So I wanted to know what your perspective was on that. Like, as far as, do you feel like they need to be trained when you bring them into a new home?
Yeah, I mean it's again the training portion of it, if there isn't some underlying anxiety or fear of the environment, it's a great mental stimulus, and
Hmm.
it's like we talked about before with older dogs, it's gonna help keep that muscle strong.
Hmm.
Um, and it's also really valuable if you're bringing them into a new house with maybe some new dogs that they're not necessarily used to. Training is a great way to redirect a behavior that you don't want. So if your dog's really good at sitting and he knows that if he sits, he's going to get something really good, but he is going to antagonize another house member, having that sit command on lock is going to redirect him
Mm.
instead of going and causing trouble with
Mm.
other things in the house or getting into things that maybe he shouldn't be into. So that's just one example. So
Yeah.
I know old dogs, the whole you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, you can. It's a little bit harder. Um, but it's certainly a good mental stimulus.
Yeah, I see it's possible, but I definitely see the mountain you have to climb it seems a lot steeper.
Yes, it is.
Because,
It
but
takes
think about it.
another level of patience. Yes.
Because I mean, we're talking about a dog who's had this embedded behavior reaction to whatever their environment is for 17 years, and you're now going to be like, "Ooh, I'm going to change it now, like in a
Right.
day."
Right.
So I could see that, and that's not, to me. It sounds like I'm not really qualified to be able to mold him the way I'd like to mold my dog Belle. Just because, like, so for example, um, my when my dad comes to get my dog, he comes inside, and Chase does not like strangers, like walking in the house. It's not even, he'll just be laying there, but as soon as he lays eyes on him, he starts barking at him, like, and he won't stop. And so you have to, like, put like a blanket over his head, and then he'll stop. He'll, like, I can't see, so I won't. So that, but like that's to do that every time. So I was just curious. Um, how should people be going about finding the right training? If we're just talking about training and not behavior, let's say they have a new dog. How should people be finding about yeah? How should people be going about finding the right training, in your opinion? And are there, like, what are the best trainers, you would say?
So I will be the first person to tell you not all trainers are created equal, and it's honestly very challenging to find a good one.
Hmm.
Especially if you have a dog that's not just this perfect little happy blank slate that's just going to absorb everything that you have to throw at it.
Hmm.
But starting with your veterinarian. So if you have this bright, shiny new little puppy, step one, you need to make sure they're healthy and
Hmm.
make sure they're vaccinated. So uh, most of the time, veterinarians work very closely with trainers in the area. So a lot of times they'll have really good recommendations. Other things I always encourage. So one big myth is it is absolutely forbidden to take your puppy out and socialize with other dogs before they're completely vaccinated at 16 weeks. I've probably said it 3 or 4 times. Our window is 0 to 12. And after we get past that 16-week mark, that's when things really start to get written in stone. So a lot of larger, like in Austin, we have Zoom Room, Taurus, and they're larger facilities that offer boarding, and some have training involved. But one of the most valuable things you can do is get into a puppy socialization class. So do your homework. Again, not all created equal, but a lot of these facilities, they're very stringent with vaccine records. They disinfect the area that the puppies are going to be in, so the risk of them picking up things like distemper or parvo or something like that's very low. And they just let these guys just come in and socialize and get used to things and get used to new people. And, going to these classes on a regular basis, you can kind of see most of the time they're put on by the trainers that work at the facility. And if there's, a particular trainer that's really vibing and seems to have a good rapport with your pet, maybe you continue to work with them through that whole process. Um, there's some different certifications. One of the challenging parts is there is no regulating body for dog trainers. And there's some that are just purely positive reinforcement. There's positive and negative reinforcement. There's you name it, to varying degrees. But Karen Pryor Academy is one. If I see that um, on the list of credentials for a particular trainer, that's a fairly well-rounded program that doesn't necessarily, if we do have any underlying medical issues or emotional issues with that pet, um, that's not kind of a method of training that's going to potentially just blow the lid off those issues and make them worse.
Okay. Um, so when we're talking about finding the right training, I want to get your perspective on this because there's two different camps. So this is slightly a little bit of a controversial detour here. What are your thoughts on what they call balance training, similar to that, like raising a little kid? Reward them when they do something good, let them know when they do something bad, like correcting them. When you're raising a kid, so they don't question authority, don't be disrespectful. Like, what are your thoughts on balance training? Is what it's called, because there's a lot.
Yeah.
It gets a rap about it gets a certain perspective, from those who are all about only positive reinforcement training, um, saying that it confuses, and then there's some people who are like, well, I think it works great. I don't know. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, to break it down to a fundamental level, so the negative reinforcement. If we have negative reinforcement with a kid, we can say, you know, that's wrong, have a punishment, and then explain, okay, let's rationalize this. Even with a
Mm.
small child, we have that level of language where we can say, okay, this is why you're getting in trouble. And if it happens again, this is what is going to happen, and this is why. We don't have that level of communication with animals. It's a very cause and effect type relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of them being able to rationalize and say, oh, well, maybe next time, I'll try it a little different, they're like, whoa, I just got the crap zapped out of me because I sniffed this particular thing. And so this particular thing that I sniffed, whether it be the car or something, when really they're just trying to get their dog back. Maybe they've
Hmm.
been screaming at them to come back, come back, come back, and they didn't come, and then they got zapped because they were standing next to the mailbox, and now that
Mm.
dog's petrified of the mailbox, right? So, and we can't take a
Oh,
step back and say, well, no, it's
okay.
because you didn't come. They're just like, okay, what was the last thing going through my brain when that negative stimulus hit? And just because we're perceiving it as what should be happening doesn't mean that the animal's doing it. So unless you're using these negative stimuli in just absolutely precise ways, a lot of times it can cause more damage than good. And, I do see, I'm not going to lie, like I see dog trainers that utilize, e-collars and prong collars and things that are known for a more negative stimulus.
Hmm.
And I mean, these dogs are like robots. They could join the Navy tomorrow. They're just so well behaved. But you can have a very well trained dog that still has behavior issues. It
Hmm.
could be that you leave that dog alone and he still has separation anxiety. He has these anxieties and fears. Or you have this very well-trained dog that you then take into a vet clinic and somebody tries to draw its blood and it tries to take their arm off.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
that's the positive reinforcement. It's certainly another level of patience. A lot of people roll their eyes in it because we do live in that society where it's like everybody gets a participation trophy, right?
Hmm.
Like it's just rainbows and butterflies and nothing in the world can hurt you. But with dogs, especially young dogs, really trying to only have positive effect, that's um, benefiting them, and then having it more of a, if you're doing this, you're not going to get that reward, so you're just going to lose interest in it.
So, so that's interesting because you bring up a good point. I never really thought about it like that. As far as you can't sit the dog down, being like, "Listen, here's what you did. This is why you were punished." They're just
Hmm.
like they did exactly what you said is cause and effect. They walked by a tree, like just zing, boom, they got zapped or something like that.
Hmm.
So that's a really good way to look at it, and I can definitely see how they would confuse it. And I have seen instances where a dog is really well trained, but the relationship with humans is
Hmm.
not always trusting,
Right.
or maybe the relationship with the owner is more out of like, ooh, am I, like I don't want to be out of line. So the
Right.
relation, you can tell that there's a relationship where the dog isn't like just so much about the owner. They're more like standing attention,
Right.
making sure that they don't do anything wrong. I guess as I can, it's weird. It's hard to say that you see that, but you can like kind of tell their the body language.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, the body
Yeah.
language. And so, okay, so what about this? Let's say you're doing positive reinforcement, but instead of quote unquote correcting with a zap or a tug on the leash, e-collar, what have you, vibration, what if they, if you have the ability, um, they perform the poor behavior, you come up to them neutrally, and I'm sure you like this may be something for more of a behaviorist or a dog trainer, but you come up to them neutral, no anger, nothing. You just walk them to timeout, and you have them sit there for like 10-15 minutes. What are your thoughts on that? While also incorporating pretty much all positive reinforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is, again, it's just trying to wrap our minds around what could potentially have a lasting impact on our dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Because fear, just like, people are way more likely to leave a negative review than a positive review because negative things stick with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just because, like I'm not the most timely person, and if I'm running late to get my hair cut and I'm more than 10 minutes late, tough cookies, I'm going to get a cancellation fee and I'm not going to get a haircut.
Yeah.
So cancellation fee, that is more of a negative thing. But if, okay, I'm not going to get my haircut. So it's taking away what they want. Like I'm not going to have this lasting, just detrimental impact and potential association. It's just going to be like, well, I did this and I didn't get this. So maybe it's not worth
Hmm.
what I initially thought.
Okay.
Or even better, for instance, like if you have a dog that um, is really mouthy, which is a completely normal developmental process in a puppy, that puppies do when they're in a litter. They shape. That's how they interpret their world around them. It's how they learn how to play with other dogs. And um, if somebody just smacks them on the head when they're mouthing and they're like, wait, this is something that I'm meant to do. And now I'm really confused. And, instead of doing that, just say, okay, well, that was a little too hard. I don't like that. I'm not going to play with you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
All that puppy wanted to do was play. That was
Mm.
his positive reinforcement. And now taking that away from him, it's like, okay, well, I did this and I lost this. So maybe I'm not going to do that again. And it's a much slower process because,
Mm-hmm.
again, we're not having that negative stimulus, but we're not going to potentially incite fear
Right.
in that pet, that
Yeah.
could
No
could break the
traumatic
trust.
experience, that kind of
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
or it
Um,
imprints on them.
exactly. Yeah. One really good example is if an owner finds their puppy has urinated or had an accident on the floor and they rub their nose in it, that dog has no idea what that means. They just mean, oh my God, I just, peed in the
I'm
vicinity
getting
of mom
forced
or
to the ground.
dad, and now I'm getting forced to the ground. Now that means, I probably should just hide it. And it doesn't mean like, oh, I shouldn't do this inside. It's just, okay, I need to do this where mom and dad aren't. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of one. People very much overestimate like the cognitive leaps that our pets can make. We need to do everything in very small bites.
That's it's a conundrum because they understand some things but not everything. But we don't know because we don't have that communication with them. So we don't know where their brain capacity is at. So we're like just kind of experimenting. At least that's how I think we found all this stuff out about behavior and how like dogs think is
Hmm.
more cause and effect. So we're like experimenting. Well, the way you're explaining it to me is totally changed, like opened my perspective because I just didn't really think that, oh, like they're just going to associate whatever they were close to, whatever they were just doing with, with what negative punishment, a negative
Hmm.
reinforcement versus, but it's because we don't know, or at least if you're a new dog owner, you don't know, and you're not educated, you haven't been educated, you don't know where they're at mentally or
Right.
how they think or what.
Hmm.
So that's really good stuff. Now let's move on from this type of behavioral training here to other topics in behavioral training. Let's say someone has um, a new puppy. How should they be going about introducing them to environments, to other dogs? I know you said something about making sure they're vaccinated. Did you say that was a myth where they cannot wait? They the myth is they must wait to 16 weeks.
So the myth is that your dog has to be kept in a little quarantine bubble until they're 16 weeks. Like that
Okay.
is the greatest injustice a veterinarian can do to an owner with a new puppy is say
Okay.
you can't socialize with other dogs. Now, that's not to be said just let them into the big wide open
Mm-hmm.
and go ham and go wherever. It has to be done safely and it has to be done smart.
Mm-hmm.
But again, and I feel like some veterinarians would probably hang me up after hearing me say this, but the risk of a dog having debilitating behavior issues by not being socialized is much, 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 much higher than that dog potentially picking up rabies and distemper parvo if done in a smart manner. So I would never advocate somebody take their unvaccinated puppy to the city dog park,
Mm-hmm.
or, even into Petco or PetSmart, where there is just, you know, a 20 dogs of which we have no idea what they're vaccinated for,
Mm-hmm.
running willy-nilly. But if you have close friends with well-adjusted dogs that are vaccinated and healthy, getting them over, to different homes, to different environments with different smells,
Mm-hmm.
taking them into places like Lowe's or Home Depot and putting them in the cart, same thing so they can get around new people and new sounds and smells, going into the puppy socialization classes where they're in and around other dogs their age that are programmed to have the same behaviors versus, trying to throw them in with the 17-year-old dachshund that's like, yeah, come at me and I'm yeah, like this is not okay.
Yeah.
So, those are some different examples that are just absolutely critical in the early time period, of a new puppy's brain development.
Okay, and I asked a behaviorist about this, or maybe she's a dog trainer. Um, but anyways, I asked her about exposing your dog, kind of using exposure therapy. My dog is terrified of boxes, terrified of suitcases, hates water. I'd like for her to tolerate at least one or two of the three things. Now, I don't want to make it worse, but I've heard
Hmm.
that exposing them to the thing that they're afraid of, in a certain way, can help them get over it. Is there a way to do it that is, I guess, quote unquote, humane? And then is there a way to do it that is inhumane, as far as from your
Yeah.
perspective?
And that is a very delicate line. So, what you're describing, so there's desensitization
Uh huh.
that can very quickly turn into sensitization. So,
Uh
say, your dog has a fear of clippers, but one example. So, you have the clippers on and your dog's on the other side of the room, just, her tail's between her legs, her ears are down, she's crouched down, she's not looking, at you. She's just trying to do her best to be as small as possible, just filled with anxiety. That is 100% making the issue worse. There is
huh.
nothing about that. You could stand in that room for 30 minutes and it's probably not going to get any better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you are, say, she's in one side of the room and you have the clippers on and you're reading her body language and she's has soft ears, her tail's wagging, she's interested in something else. Okay, cool. That is desensitization. So if you start walking across the room and you're getting closer and you start noticing her tense up and she's like, "Ooh, I don't know about this." At that point, if you truly want to stay in the camp of desensitization, that's where, you take 10 steps back and you go back to the point where she was in her comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
even, one step further. So if you purely stick within desensitization, you're going to be there for probably weeks at a time before you can even get closer or approach her with the clippers.
Mm-hmm.
It's like watching water boil. It takes forever. But
Mm-hmm.
if you take it one step further and you have maybe somebody that she trusts there, giving her treats and redirecting any anxiety she might be having, when in the
Mm-hmm.
background, maybe you're getting a little closer with the clippers. She's like, you know what? Nothing's really happening. Things are good. Life is good. Something that's scary, I'm distracted enough to be able to digest it versus just hyperfixate on it. And using that positive reinforcement with true desensitization is absolutely humane.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that takes a lot of patience, and it's very easy to cross that line, once they are uncomfortable, knowing when to take a step back and getting back into their comfort zone.
Mm.
That's when it becomes not one, not very productive, and two, not very humane.
Great info, because I don't, I don't want to, I don't want to sound cheap, but I don't want to to opt to a animal behaviorist would be more of like a last resort thing. So I'd like to try, like with the suitcases or a box, I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to get her used to that on my own if I can. So that was
Mm-hmm.
really good information. Um, Now, let's say a dog has, like you said, anxiety, severe anxiety, um, and there's just no fixing, or at least we're not having success with the behavioral problem, or you've just discovered this behavioral problem. When is it appropriate to opt for medication versus training with a behaviorist to try and fix the problem?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I, I'll be honest, we use behavior modifying medications all the time, and they're a very helpful tool. They
Mm-hmm.
are absolutely not a magic bullet. They're, if not used with a behavior modifying regimen or, I don't even want to say training, just different confidence building exercises, kind of like the one that I mentioned earlier with the clippers and kind of just keeping her in a comfort zone. Um, it can be a game changer. And how I typically describe it, because so many people, the minute I say medications, they're like, I'm not gonna drug my pet. Like, I'm not gonna just turn my dog into a zombie and take their personality away. And it almost kind of people jump to the sense like you're insulting me and my dog by saying that
Mm-hmm.
my dog needs meds. But what it really does is it decreases the threshold of which they're reactive. So it
Mm-hmm.
expands their comfort zone where we can work and gain a lot more traction with some of these, behavior modification um, practices and regimens. And usually we get a lot more traction than if we didn't use medications at all. And there's just because we have a dog that's anxious doesn't necessarily mean they weren't properly socialized. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were abused or beaten or anything like that. Just like people, there are people who have just kind of a genetically programmed emotional bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
And the sensitization and the things that we do when they're young doesn't necessarily um, change that bandwidth. It just optimizes what we can get out of it. If we just have a truly anxious dog, there are some people that, have agoraphobia. They can never leave their home. It just consumes them with anxiety and medications can be a complete game changer for those people. So really just trying to put it into that perspective. And if you're unsure, if you're not quite sure, does my dog truly anxious? Is this situational? So is it just, fireworks or thunderstorm, or is, my dog anxious all the time? That's something that your veterinarian can help you with, and especially from a house call vet standpoint, being able to observe that dog in its own environment, because when we see dogs, they're almost always anxious because they're at the vet's office with a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other anxious creatures. So, if you're unsure, thinking about a house call consult can be really helpful.
Got it. Yeah, no, so it sounds like, and myself included, what people typically get wrong is when I thought about that as far as medication, I thought it was just like, we can't figure it out, here's some meds, and he's just going to be on those meds. But it sounds like that you guys just, well, yeah, you guys as a whole, veterinarians, veterinary behaviorists, they use medication as a tool to expand their comfort zone in the process of getting them over the fear of whatever it is they're afraid of, not as a cure all, like they're just going to be on this forever.
Yeah. And just to be fair, almost all of the medications that we prescribe for long-term use, they're not sedating. So they're not going to turn your dog into a zombie or even change their personality in a negative way. I mean, we do have medications for situational anxiety that can calm them down and do have a sedating effect, but the medications that we're giving for generalized anxiety, it's literally just kind of reprogramming the brain chemistry,
Mm-hmm.
to make them just be able to tolerate and acclimate to the environment around them. And some dogs we start them on medication and they do really well and we keep them on it long term. Other dogs, if we have a new dog that's coming into environment and we have these other behavioral issues come up, same thing with cats. Sometimes we just put them on for a stint. We kind of redirect some of the behaviors, things improve, and then we wean them off and we're good to go. So
Hmm.
it's not a one size fits all thing. It's definitely legwork with the owner, typically the veterinarian, and then either a veterinary behaviorist or a trainer.
Got it. Okay. Well, let's wrap up here with the last topic, CBD. Um, you touched on it in one of our very first podcasts, I believe. But I'm just curious why, and then I'll ask some more questions about its uses. But how come when the topic comes up, CBD, why do veterinarians dance around this topic where people are just like, I don't even, not going to talk about it. There's some people, at least from what I've seen on the internet, veterinarians who have like blogs or they have some kind of information on their site about CBD that they readily use it. So I just want to know your perspective and what you're seeing in the field, why you think people dance around that topic.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to see this evolve over the last few years. And it's come a really long way, but up until very recently, it's only been a few years ago, CBD oil and products, not even THC, just CBD products were classified as a Schedule 1 controlled drug by the DEA,
Mm.
meaning for me to recommend that you give your dog CBD would be akin to me recommending your dog take cocaine, which is absurd. And the industry knew it was absurd. And things changed. But because of that legality, it scared a lot of veterinarians into saying, ooh, this is pretty unkosher stuff, and we don't really want to have that kind of liability. And a lot of states still can't even discuss it, can't even
Mm.
recommend it as a therapy. And that's one, just the legality aspect. The other aspect is there's just so much left to be understood about the mechanism and how it really affects dogs exclusively, and how it differs from how it affects people. But there are, just in the last recent years, some products that are commercially available specifically for veterinary patients. And I went to two huge conferences, two biggest conferences in the US last year, and they were both sponsored by a CBD company. They were up there with Hills and Purina and
Hmm.
Antec, all the
Wow.
big heavy hitter names. And there was Elevet, which is now a commercially available CBD company at a professional conference. So it's having a moment. Um, it's still something, the jury's still out, but I really just rely on feedback from clients that are using it just kind of on their own accord,
Hmm.
and taking what data I can from that and just trying to keep my finger on the pulse about any new recent developments or studies or any contraindications that may come up as things evolve.
Got it. And by the way, Dr. Kingsley is not recommending that you prescribe or try CBD for your dog. Let's just put that little disclosure right
Thanks.
there.
There you
Yeah,
go. Yep,
I
yep, yep,
got you.
yep.
Don't worry about it.
Yep.
But have you seen any positive results from like clients taking it upon themselves, using it with their dogs?
I've again seen it both ways. People, I live in Austin, which is a very kind of holistic, more like natural remedy type population.
They're hip.
They're hip. They're yeah. So I do have a lot that'll just say, "Hey, by the way, I bought this product and we started it, and this is the sign that we saw." And I would say for the most part, it's been positive.
Hmm.
And for what it's worth, I know, so Elevet, the product that I had mentioned, that's now a big sponsor in a lot of our conferences, they actually do have one study that was done, I think it was at UC Davis, but using CBD products for arthritis pain. So not even
Mm.
for behavioral issues. I'd say way more often than not, when I hear clients giving it to their pet, it is more so for calming effects or behavioral type issues. So, um, again, not saying I recommend it from the horse's mouth, but just passing the news along that anecdotally, patients that I see and clients that I know use it outside of that recommendation, uh, they seem to have a very positive feedback.
Okay. And so it's I mean, I would agree with the you said you've seen it more for behavioral rather than pain.
More often than not, I think it's a little from the clinical study side of things, it was a little bit more easy to quantify,
Mm-hmm.
how exactly it was a little bit more of a quantitative versus qualitative study, but the behavioral, I mean, again, extrapolating from people, most people take CBD, to chill out or,
Mm-hmm.
for chronic pain, but that's one of the side effects.
Yeah.
And I had one, it was actually another doctor's patient who had mentioned that they were able, after all of these behavior meds that they were on for, 6 months, the owner went out on a limb and started a CBD product, and they were able to start weaning down on some of his other medications, not
Wow.
discontinue them, but able to get the same results they were getting at much higher doses
Hmm.
um, previously. Now, again, there's a lot of other factors that could have gone into that, but
Yeah.
looking at just the immediate relationship.
We always have to preface these anecdotal little
Yes.
scenarios. I have an anecdote, here too. Chase, he's a fighter. He has periodontal disease, but we were giving him some CBD for that because I mean he could the teeth chattering thing. Just you could tell
Hmm.
he was in pain. Anytime he would just try and lick his lips. So it seemed to help. He slept a lot. I mean, he already sleeps a lot, but
Yeah.
but yeah, no. So it seems like he was in a lot less pain, um, anecdotally. But
Word
anyways,
on the street is.
yeah. Word
is
on the street. Well, this was awesome. We unpacked a lot here. This was a lot of information. Hopefully, this was helpful for everyone listening. Um, Lastly, because you've been because you've been here so many times and provided so much value, let's talk a little bit about where people can find Better Vet, where people can find you if they're in your area, so people can come, see your practice and start using you as a veterinarian.
Yeah. So, Better Vet, we're nationwide house call practice. So um, we've grown tremendously in the last few years. So personally, I'm one of three doctors in Austin, Texas. But if you're unsure if we're in your city yet, you can download our app, which is Better Vet, and you can also find us on the web at www.bettervet.com. We're also on social. We've got a lot of really cool stories and reels. We have a weekly Ask a Vet question, and you can submit questions if you want to. If you have just a burning question, you want to see thrown up on social media. So definitely feel free to engage there. Um, Again, on Instagram, just bettervet.com. Me personally, I'm motodoc_46. But certainly check us out.
Cool. And I wanted to ask, does Better Vet allow you to, first off, are you licensed in other states?
I'm not currently, but I'm actually in the process of looking into being licensed in other states to potentially provide virtual visits with
I was just gonna say,
pets.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna say that, because I was gonna, if you said no, I'd have been like, dang, like, for those listening. But awesome. Well, this was super helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Kingsley, yet again for coming on. Everyone else, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us today. If we change your perspective, if you learned something new, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video. And with that, I hope you all have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.